Well, I know that you're down, just feeling like you can't get up, and I just want to offer a little bit of love. Now, I don't really know what to do.
So Alan grew up in what was then Rhodesia and loved wildlife more than anything. I totally get this. My husband is from South Africa, and he wanted to be a game ranger when he grew up too. When Alan was in his 20s working to set up the national parks in Southern Africa, he and his peers noticed that the animals weren't as numerous or healthy as they had remembered, and the land didn't look as vibrant. The experts determined, and this made logical sense, that there must be too many animals. So what they did was they fenced off the land. However, the land continued to deteriorate and even got worse, which made no sense if the problem was, in fact, that there were too many animals using up the land. Again, that's how, if we were thinking in a linear way, we have, these resources, and if there are more animals, well, they're going to use up those resources. And that was the thinking then. But so this didn't make sense. Alan devoted many decades to teasing out this paradox and came up with a few key insights. One is that grazing animals and grasslands co-evolved so that the land needed the animals in the same way that the animals need the land. Two, that a landscape that plants that the grasses in an area can be undergrazed as well as overgrazed. In other words, certainly there can be too much animal impact, but the land will suffer if there's not some degree of animal impact. And the third, that specific types of landscapes function differently. And I want to linger a little bit here because the brittleness scale is really of use to all land managers, and it's something that's not often talked about. So when we think of dry land versus water-rich land, we often look to the metric of average annual rainfall. The brittle, non-brittle continuum takes another approach. It speaks to the distribution of moisture throughout the year. So where I live here in Vermont, it's very non-brittle. Okay, that's what it is. Like we'd at this year, I'm telling you, we'd be like -1, not just 1, but -1. We've gotten so much precipitation. So, but also it's not only the amount, but we get precipitation in various forms throughout the year. There's really never a dry period. However, much and perhaps most of the world has a distinct dry season and rainy season. So a sole focus on rainfall doesn't tell us how a given landscape behaves. So for example, I mentioned my husband, he grew up in Johannesburg. And then when he was about 12 or so, he moved to London. Now, in his memory, Johannesburg was always sunny and beautiful, and London was always wet and rainy, and people who have traveled to those places may, say that that's pretty accurate. Yet, in fact, they both get about the same amount of rain. Only in Johannesburg, it comes all at once, and in London, it's spread out across the calendar. Yeah, so I was visiting South Africa once when it was in the rainy season, and I remember it was intense. So I remember because we had been renting accommodations in a high place. I mean, Johannesburg is in itself high, and this was a high elevation neighborhood within Johannesburg. And it seemed like for a week, an entire week, every time we were driving home, it started to storm. And there was one house that we always passed, and the windows were always like lighting up with lightning. I just remember that really vividly. So now for the wildlife piece of this. All right, so we've got brittle environments like, over here, 10 is a desert, maybe a place like Zimbabwe is 9, maybe, Spain might be 7, depending where we are in Spain. So yeah, so it's a whole continuum, and understanding where you are on that continuum tells you a lot about the challenges that you'll have in doing permaculture, doing holistic management, in managing that particular landscape. So in terms of wildlife, a brittle environment presented nature with a challenge. Namely, how do you maintain moisture in the soil to keep alive plants and soil life, basically, so that you've got life continuing from the end of one rainy season to the beginning of the next? And the answer that nature came up with was through the digestion and behavior of grazing animals, particularly ruminants. So these are some beautiful bulls in Chihuahua, Mexico. Here's how it works. The animals nibble plants, and that exposes the roots, the growth points of grasses, to sunlight, which stimulates growth. The animals press down seeds so that a diversity of plants have a chance to germinate, and also they trample decaying plant matter into the ground so that it gets broken down and incorporated into the soil. Their waste adds moisture and nutrients. And really, there are so many nuances to this that I'm continually learning about. For example, ruminants like cattle and monogastric species like horses, donkeys, and zebras choose different types of fodder. So having both on the land creates a kind of mosaic landscape, which is favorable to a diversity of species. Pack hunting predators are an important piece of this dynamic, as they keep the animals on the move. As a defense strategy, the cattle or sheep or whatever species that you're working with, or are on the landscape in the wild, they bunch up and then move as a herd, trampling the ground. So that worked as nature designed. However, we humans have carved up landscapes with roads and cities, and there aren't enough predators around to sustain the system, and the predators that are there don't have access to the animals. So this leaves a management void that humans can fill, and livestock can stand in for wild herbivores, and humans can stand in for the predators.
That singing makes it better, oh yeah. Yeah, 'cause singing makes it better when you've got a broken heart, and singing makes it better.